A surprise shift in Spain. A new prime minister takes charge after a corruption scandal forces out Mariano Rajoy. I'm Imran Garta, and today's newsmaker is Pedro Sanchez. After almost 8 years in power, Mariano Rajoy is no longer Spain's prime minister. In his place is the man responsible for his demise. Pedro Sanchez triggered a no-confidence vote against Rajoy, accusing him of failing to deal with corruption within his own party. And Parliament agreed. Now the leader of the country's Socialist Party faces the tough task of governing. The former economics professor is leading one of Europe's largest economies, where unemployment is among the highest in the EU. And the country is still divided over Catalan independence. But with Sanchez's party holding less than a quarter of seats in Parliament, how will the new Prime Minister be able to govern effectively? Here's Christine Pirovalakis.
Spain has a new Prime Minister.
Pedro Sánchez Pérez Castejón. No.
Pedro Sanchez unseated Mariano Rajoy after the veteran conservative lost a no-confidence vote on Friday.
Ramos Esteban.
It's been an honor to have been Spain's Prime Minister. It's an honor to be able to leave a better Spain than the one I found when I started the job.
For years, Rajoy has weathered a string of corruption scandals linked to his popular party. He managed to ride out the country's financial crisis, a 25% youth unemployment rate, and a showdown with the Catalan region seeking independence. But his downfall finally came after a Spanish court found the party had benefited from illegal kickbacks. Tough sentences for money laundering, tax evasion, and fraud were handed down to 29 people.
I'm very happy because we've removed the mafia in the Popular Party, which has been stealing from Spaniards for over 30 years. And now there's no money for pensions.
With Rajoy's credibility damaged, Sanchez, the leader for the opposition Socialist Party, pushed for a parliamentary vote of no confidence. He's the first politician in Spain to unseat a prime minister in this way. Finding a way out of the economic and political crisis will be one of Sanchez's main challenges. He says he's willing to start talks with the Catalans, but has refused to give the region independence. His rise to power took place as Catalan authorities swore in their new cabinet on Saturday, one of his top challenges.
Voy a abordar todos los desafíos que tiene nuestro país con humildad, con entrega y sobre todo con mucha determinación, primero para transformar y modernizar nuestro país, que es lo que ha hecho siempre el Partido Socialista cuando ha gobernado, y en segundo lugar para atender las urgencias sociales de muchísima gente que sufre precariedad y que sufre desigualdad.
Many in Spain are demanding that elections be called, saying they don't feel represented by the new government.
We came here asking to vote. We want to raise our voice and say we don't agree with this decision.
But with a bloc of only 84 seats in the 350-seat parliament, can a minority government in power bring about change in Spain? Christine Pirovalakis, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now from Madrid by Luis Arroyo. He was the political advisor to Spain's former socialist prime minister, José Luis Zapatero. Also in Madrid is Cristina Manzano. She's the editor-in-chief of Es Global, a Spanish publication specializing in foreign affairs. And completing our panel is Andrew Dowling. He's a senior lecturer in Hispanic Studies at the University of Cardiff. I thank you all for joining us on the Newsmakers. I'm not going to get into where it all went wrong for Rajoy or whether he deserved to be ousted or not. Let's look forward and let's look at Sanchez and what this means. Cristina Manzano, is Pedro Sanchez the right man for the job?
Who knows? Who knows? This has been so unexpected that nobody knows what really his program is going to be or what his team is going to be. But he's tried and he's won, and that is democracy.
Andrew Dowling, is the Socialist Party that appealing? Or is the Populist Party just that bad and the Socialists were lucky?
Well, yeah, there are a number of elements. I think the most important element to think about Spanish politics over the past few decades is Spain used to be a two-party system, the Popular Party and the Socialists. Now it's a four-party system. So you've got two parties on the left and two parties on the right. So both left and right parties have to think about what their opposition on their side is doing. So the Popular Party are actually more concerned about what's happening on their right with Ciudadanos, and the Socialists are more concerned about the threat from Podemos. So I think we have to think about it in those terms as a four-party system.
Right. Luis Arroyo, no democratic mandate from the people, no great power in parliament. How is this guy going to govern?
Well, he's got a great opportunity. First, he's got an economy that is not in a bad shape. Actually, it's an expected growth of almost 3%. Second, the mood of the country is much better now than it was only 2 years ago or 1 year ago. And third, there's a limitation in the mandate. At the most, he's going to govern for 2 years. Then we will have elections. So he's got the great opportunity of enhancing the respectability and the reputation of the social democracy here in Spain, which was decreasing in the last times. So we will see, but there's no doubt that there's a great opportunity for the socialists, one that they didn't have even only 10 days ago or 1 week ago.
Yeah. So Luis, corruption brought down Rajoy. But corruption is also something that's really plaguing the socialists in Andalusia. So can we expect Sanchez to take corruption very seriously and clean house from within as a first priority?
He wasn't there at all when the case that is being judged right now in Andalusia. So he's not related to that case as much as Rajoy was the one in charge of the whole PP party in the last decade. So I don't think that corruption is going to be a big thing for Sanchez at this point.
Cristina, how tough is his job going to be to lead Parliament ahead of 2020 elections, if he can actually get there?
Yeah, that is going to be very, very difficult. Considering the fragility with which he has arrived to power. That is his ability to make alliances, to get support for several essential issues. I believe that if he is able to identify 2 or 3 very social issues that have been left aside by the Popular Party, he will be able to govern, to pass some laws or to make some advances. If he's not able to identify those 2 or 3 issues in which he can gather the support of Podemos, for instance, it will be very, very difficult because the parliament is very, very fragmented in this case, and he has got only temporary support by some of the parties, especially by the independentist parties in Catalonia.
Right. Andrew, something that has divided the country over the past year has been the prospect of Catalan independence. They had a referendum, it was deemed illegal, their leadership's in jail. Now, something I don't quite understand is why are some people seeing this as an opportunity when it comes to dialogue with the Catalan leadership, or maybe even the releasing of those who the Catalans call political prisoners, given that Sanchez was no fan of Catalan independence and was on side with Rajoy when it came to that vote?
Yeah, well, I think the principal difference between Sanchez and Rajoy's government is since Rajoy came to power in November 2011, Catalan independence, the support for independence stood at about 24%. With Rajoy leaving as Prime Minister in June 2018, support for independence is 48%. And one of the major criticisms of Rajoy's government is that they never engaged politically with Catalan grievances, and they just ignored the issue or thought the issue would go away. So I think I fully take on board your points, and I think that the Catalan issue, some attempted resolution, negotiations, discussions will be essential for ensuring the stability of the Spanish government over the next few months, because there are 17 Catalan independent seats that can pull the plug on Sanchez any time and make the government fall. So negotiations, gestures will be very, very important in terms of de-escalating, if you want, the Catalan conflict.
Luis Arroyo, we're hearing from Andrew that Sanchez could address Catalan grievances, but then I go and read articles which tell me that Sanchez called the Catalan separatist leader Torra a racist, right? So tell me what makes this guy special for us to have confidence that he's going to open that door to negotiation and addressing grievances?
Well, it's a little bit complicated to explain, but it happens that the same day that Sanchez took government last Friday, the very same day, the Article 155 of our Constitution, the one that allowed the central government to overtake the management of Catalonia, that article came down because Torra, the president of Catalonia, was able to find a legitimate government, so to speak. So even in this, Sanchez is being very lucky because the situation, the conflict between the central government and the government of Catalonia is coming down in a very fast way. So it happens that he will be probably even lucky on that the independentists are already kind of tired of the situation. The central government has changed. So even in this, the luck will be probably on the side of Sanchez.
Fresh opportunity, Cristina, for the Catalans who want to break away or maybe just negotiate a better deal with Madrid?
I'm not as optimistic as Luis is. I think it is really changing the mood and the attitude, and that is very important. There has been no attitude, no willingness at all from the Madrid government so far to speak, even to speak with the Catalan independentists. And the mere fact of having a gesture, of a reapproachment and so on can be positive. On the other hand, if Sanchez goes too far in getting closer to the independentists, which, by the way, have not said at all that they would give up their demands of independence, of reaching a republic. If he goes too far, I think he can leave aside a part of his electorate, and he can upset a lot of people from the left who don't want at all to hear about independence in Catalonia.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It is a very delicate balance there.
Yeah, delicate balance. Luis, if he called you up and said, Luis, I'm a fan of yours and all the advice you gave to Zapatero and others, what's the first thing I have to do? What would you tell him to do?
I was working actually with him when he started his run 3 years ago. I would suggest, and I think that he's going to do exactly that. I would suggest that he goes for very symbolic things that are important in terms of character that distinguish him from the very bad manners of Rajoy, of the president leaving. So I would say that more or less the things are already done for the 2 years ahead. The budget is approved already, more or less. The economy is going quite well. The Catalonia is still a problem, but in ways of a certain resolution. So I would say do certain things, just a couple of things that people understand that you are different from Rajoy. Expectations are very low. Risks are many. I agree absolutely in that. So do just a couple of things that people consider that the government we have is different from the one of Rajoy.
Okay, well, it's been a pleasure talking to all of you. It's been good to have the Spanish political situation demystified a little bit and get a sense of what the challenges will be for Sanchez as he leads the country. Cristina Manzano, Luis Arroyo and Andrew Dowling, I thank you all for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Still to come on the Newsmakers, Russia finds itself at the center of a diplomatic face-off in Syria. It's Iran versus Israel. Will Moscow mediate or aggravate? And we speak to a newsmaker in Pakistan. We ask the country's former spy chief about his book, which could land him in jail. Until now, Russia and Iran have been operating as allies in Syria, but that alliance is being questioned after Russia allegedly tried to forge a deal with Iran's arch-enemy, Israel. According to reports, Moscow agreed for Iranian forces to leave Syria's southern border in exchange for Israel allowing Assad's troops back into the area. But Israel says no deal was ever reached, and Iran says its military presence is at the request of the Syrian regime. So, can Moscow have its bread buttered on both sides? Randolph Nogel reports.
In Damascus, the clamor of war has largely fallen silent. In its absence, the Assad regime is steadily taking back territory lost over the last 7 years. Indiscriminate bombings and sieges have forced the last pockets of opposition from the capital. Now the Assad regime has set its sights on removing the remaining strongholds of resistance across the country. Of primary concern to the Assad regime is Idlib in the northwest, Daraa in the southwest, and US-controlled Al-Tanf base on Syria's border with Iraq.
This is our land, it's our right, and it's our duty to liberate it. And the Americans should leave. Somehow, they're going to leave.
In a recent interview with Russia's state broadcaster RT, Bashar al-Assad threatened to wage war to expel US troops if dialogue fails. In an upcoming presidential summit, Russian President Vladimir Putin is expected to try to convince the United States to withdraw.
Do not believe any statements that talk about agreements in the south unless you see the United States withdrawing its forces from Tanf base, and it must withdraw its forces from Tanf base. This is Syrian land, and there's no doubt of Syria's sovereignty over it.
The withdrawal of US troops appears to be the crucial caveat to a deal currently being negotiated that would create the conditions for a Syrian regime offensive to retake opposition areas in and around Daraa. Last week, Russia announced that Iranian-backed militias, which have been instrumental in enabling Assad to consolidate territory, would leave the area close to the Israeli-controlled Golan Heights. Israeli and Syrian officials have cast doubt on whether that proposal will be accepted. Israel's recent rocket attacks on Iranian-backed militias there have been aimed at reinforcing its insistence that its security needs must be met before any offensive against the opposition can take place.
The question remains, what are Iranian troops doing 1,600 kilometers away from Iran? We have said it very clearly that we will not tolerate an Iranian military presence in Syria that is capable of and trying to strike Israeli targets and terrorize Israeli civilians.
With so many vested interests among parties foreign and domestic, any deal to remove Iranian-backed forces from southeast Syria could face mixed outcomes. Either the successful avoidance of further military confrontation between Israel and Iran's proxies, or potentially the prelude to an Assad regime offensive against one of the last bastions of Syria's beleaguered revolution. Randolph Nogel, The Newsmakers.
Let's bring in our guests now. From London, we have former Kremlin advisor Alexander Nekrasov. In Tel Aviv, we have Mir Javed Anfar. He's the owner and editor of the Iran-Israel Observer. From Tehran, we have Mohammad Marandi. He's a professor at Tehran University. And with me here in the studio is journalist and Middle East correspondent Borzu Daragahi. Gentlemen, I thank you all for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Let me start with you, Borzu. So, no deal between Israel and Russia to pull Iranian forces out of Syria. That's what we're hearing. Do you believe that?
I think that there probably is no deal. There's no deal per se. I think that Russia is playing a very tough game of trying to keep rival partners sort of happy, probably telling each constituency what they think that they want to hear, and sort of juggling these different interests and so on. So it's very possible that Russia, in its confusion and rush to tone down tempers and so on, just keeps telling people what they want to hear.
Okay, so juggling rival partners. Alexander Nekrasov, is that how it is? Does Russia have two mistresses in this conflict?
Well, Russia has more than that. Russia has problems with other sides involved in this. Americans, the Saudis especially. With the Turks, there is an understanding. Of course, no troops will be pulled out at once, but there was an agreement with Lieberman in Moscow that the Iranian militias and some of the troops will be at least 20 miles away from the battlefield when this operation to destroy finally the last remnants of ISIS and other groups in the north bordering Israel will start. So that's a good turn. And there was an understanding reached when Netanyahu was in Moscow on the May celebrations of Victory Day that with Putin, that the Russians will do everything. Russia will do everything possible to keep these Iranians at bay and not let them move to Israeli borders. That is very important. I don't think you should ignore this. And I think generally we should understand something. Everybody keeps on banging on how disastrous the situation in Syria is, how long the conflict is. We should thank Russia, Turkey, and Iran for restraint and for basically preventing this war becoming a regional war. Israel played a key part in that as well. And unfortunately, the Americans didn't do much to help with that. So I think,
yeah, fair enough.
in a sense, this is a big success.
I don't think many people can find the silver linings that you are finding, but I think that's almost a separate conversation. Let me bring in Mohammed Marandi. Mohammed Marandi, when we have Israel's Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman saying publicly, tweeting and so forth, that the Russians understand Israel's security concerns, how do the Iranians feel? Do the Iranians feel that perhaps they're losing Russian support?
No. First of all, I think we have to keep in mind that the Israeli regime is very dishonest. Just a couple of weeks ago, when they attacked Syrian government positions, they claimed that they struck Iranian targets and that they destroyed 80% of Iran's infrastructure in the south of Syria, whereas there was not a single Iranian there. There wasn't an Iranian even injured. There were no facilities there. They fabricated the story in the mainstream media in the West. They basically mimicked what the Israelis said. So anything that the Israelis say, I take with a great deal of caution. On the other hand, the Iranian-Russian relationship is very good. The Iranians and the Russians together have pushed back ISIS and Al-Qaeda across the board. Recently, the Americans like to take credit for what happened, but without a doubt, they had very little role to play in anything. In fact, they helped create these extremist groups. So the Iranians, the Russians helped the Syrian government, along with Hezbollah. They helped the Syrian government and the Iraqi government to push back the extremists. Now, the important thing to keep in mind, though, is that Iran is in Syria at the request of the Syrian government. And Iran's presence in Syria is therefore based on the needs and the demands of the Syrian government. In the West, they like to exaggerate the numbers of Iranian soldiers there. They like to say that Iran is in control. That's not the reality on the ground. I've been to Syria at least 9 or 10 times during the past few years, and it's very clear that it's the Syrian government that's in control, and the Iranians are there to help to meet their needs, not to meet Iran's needs.
Certainly, and while they are there at the invitation of Bashar al-Assad's regime, that does not necessarily mean that they aren't also doing terrible things. A lot of actors doing terrible things in Syria right now. Let me bring in Mer Javedanfar. From the Israeli
No, they aren't doing terrible things.
They aren't?
No, they aren't doing any terrible
things. Okay, and I'm gonna
They're
ask...
fighting extremists. They're fighting the extremists that the United States, Al-Qaeda, and ISIS created.
Okay, I'll get a response. I'll get a response from one of the other guests
later on.
I'll get a response from Barzu to that in a moment. But let me ask you, Mer Javedanfar, for the Israelis, even though there might not be a deal on paper, as was initially reported, is the best deal for the Israelis going to be that, okay, no deal on paper, but anytime you feel you want to take out any Iranian threat, the Russians are going to let you bomb in that part of Syria, and you can sort it out that way. Is that the best deal for the Israelis right now?
Well, Imran, that seems to be the situation right now. We have a very close coordination with the Russian government. We have a direct red line, and the Russians are coordinating security-wise with Israel in terms of aerial attacks. And for now, it seems that, yes, for now, the Israeli Air Force, whenever the Iranian regime forces or Iranian regime-affiliated forces are threatening Israel, they are attacking. And thanks to this close coordination, the Russians have never come to the support or to the defense of the Iranian regime forces. But I think in the long run, what Israel is hoping is that Syria does not become a new base for the Iranian regime and its allies to threaten Israel. Of course, it's Bashar al-Assad who rules Syria. But the man in charge really today is Vladimir Putin. So Israel is developing very close relations with Vladimir Putin. And for now, we see that, yes, the Israeli Air Force seems to have carte blanche in terms of wanting to attack the Iranian regime and its affiliates. What will happen in the future? I think they're working on a deal to make sure that there's an understanding between us and the Russians in terms of what happens for the future of Syria. The Iranian regime doesn't like it. Well, we know the Iranian regime says that it doesn't have any forces there, but that doesn't make a difference. I think Israel is working very closely with Russia and, of course, with the Americans to find an arrangement, long-term arrangement.
Mer, let me ask you something that was mentioned by Mohammed Marandi, which is the idea that the Israelis prefer jihadis like the Nusra Front on the border, Sunni extremists, rather than any Iranian influence. Is that a fair accusation?
That is a ridiculous accusation coming from Mr. Marandi, who believes that ISIS was established by America and that Al-Qaeda was established by the West as well. This is completely ridiculous.
Okay, Mr. Marandi, I'm going to give you a chance to respond to that in a moment, but I want Burcu Daragahi to respond to something you said a bit earlier on. Burcu, you've reported on the ground from Syria. You've reported on this long war throughout its evolution. To the point that the Iranians haven't done any terrible things in Syria, you would respond what?
Well, I think that there's no really honorable players when it comes to Syria. I don't think that anyone has played a great role, but I think that the majority of the crimes and atrocities against civilians have been committed by the regime of Bashar al-Assad. I think that's been proven countless times by independent organizations. And to the extent that the Iranian government has supported Bashar al-Assad, it is complicit, as is the Russian government as well, in those crimes. I'm not saying that the rebels were faultless. I can also point to long stretches of the conflict. Dr. Marandi was saying that they were fighting ISIS. They were not fighting ISIS for very long stretches. The regime, the Iranians, it was most of the war, during the entirety of the war, 2012, when the Lebanese, Hezbollah, and the Iranians got really involved. They were fighting against Syrian rebels, including moderate rebel groups, Islamist rebel groups, maybe occasionally against Nusra as well, quite fiercely, but very rarely did the Syrian regime or its Iranian allies and militia partners fight against ISIS. That was a fight that was led mostly by Syrian rebels and the Kurds, the SDF forces backed by the US.
Mr. Marandi, why is it so hard to admit that the Iranians also have blood on their hands when it comes to Syria? A lot of other actors do.
Well, they don't, and the narrative that your guest is pursuing is one of nonsense. First of all, Hezbollah entered Syria in 2013, well after tens of thousands of foreign fighters were inside the country. ISIS was doing heavy trade with neighboring countries, oil trade, and the Russians were the ones who actually bombed those tens of thousands of tankers that were doing the trade. And the Americans who were flying over those tankers were doing nothing for a long period of time. The reason, of course, why the focus was not on ISIS for a period of time was because they were in the east of the country. And by the way, according to the Defense Intelligence Agency document of 2012, the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, the United States knew from early on that the dominant fighting force, they were not moderates, they were extremists, and that they were funded by neighboring countries. And the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency at that time, the famous General Michael Flynn, later on Al Jazeera of all places, admitted that the United States took a willful decision to support the extremists in Syria who wanted to create a Salafist state, as stated in the document, between Syria and Iraq. Who occupied that area? It was ISIS. So I think it's quite clear with regards to the Israeli regime. And I can go further. For example, the leaked document, the leaked audio clip.
I'll tell you why, because for brevity.
Who admitted that the United States...
I know you understand. For brevity, I want to jump in here, and I don't mean to be rude to you. I know you understand. I want to bring everybody in. I want to bring in Alexander Nekrasov here, and your point was well made. I want to bring in Alexander Nekrasov to ask, what does Putin want right now? Okay, we're in 2018. We're halfway through 2018. The Russians are calling the shots in many ways. Now what? What's it going to do with Syria?
Well, there's a lot of work to do still, because don't forget, in Idlib, there are about, 30,000 so-called rebels who are actually ISIS and al-Nusra terrorists, and they need to be dealt with. And until they exist on the territory of Syria, we don't really have an opportunity to discuss any peaceful solutions or political solutions. Now, I'd like to point out that some of your guests who are pro-Western, they use this typical method of saying a propaganda slogan and thinking that it reflects the reality on the ground. You can't do that. You can't blame Iran and Bashar Assad all the time, forgetting your old sins. Don't forget Iraq and Libya, by the way, and how the West handled them.
We're not talking about Iraq and Libya.
This has to stop. This has to stop. You can't talk in these PC slogans.
The Russian regime has carpet-bombed civilian populations
Let me finish.
And now they're saying that they want to do the same thing in Idlib province, which is many civilians. He just said, basically, that this war is not going to have a political solution until we
don't worry about the American regime in Raqqa.
You are not. Well,
okay, Mr. Nekrasov, finish your point.
The American regime bombing Raqqa.
Okay, finish your point, Mr. Nekrasov.
No, how can I finish when this propagandist immediately interferes? That's the way they do it. They shout you down. They stop you. They don't allow you. They lie. They ignore facts. You ignore facts. You lie. You lie blatantly on this channel, and you seem to think that we are all idiots and are going to buy this. I'm sorry. This doesn't work
I think
like
this
that.
Is an ad hominem
you have to understand
completely
the
unfair.
situation
If he wants
on
to
the
talk
ground.
about issues, he can.
On the ground,
but
you
he's
don't
now accused
understand
me
the
of being a
situation.
propagandist. I don't know what else. I think
Yes,
that's not
you are
a very civilized form of debate. I think that you need to go back to wherever institution you came from and learn how to behave politely, sir.
Let me give
Mr. Nekrasov to learn some manners.
Okay, Mr. Nekrasov, let me give you 30 seconds to wrap up. I'll tell you what. You know what? We're going to bring in somebody else in the next minute, and one of the reasons why I have to thank you in a minute and bring him in is because he didn't want to appear on the panel with you, because the last time you called him lots of names and called him an extremist and a terrorist. So, Mr. Nekrasov, 30 seconds, please, to finish your point before I bring in Yahya Al-Aridi. Mr. Nekrasov, go ahead.
Well, I suggest that next time we have a debate on this issue, people come in who know what's going on the ground, who don't use propaganda, and who don't shout and stop other people talking, because this is not a debate. This is just shouting and screaming and propagandist slogans. That's what I mean. And that's why, by the way, in Syria, there was a problem. And when you say, what does Putin want? Putin wants to find some sort of a solution where people do not hide their real agendas and accuse others of committing, as we heard today, crimes.
Okay, no, I'm glad you answered my question, and I thank you very much for joining us here on the program, Alexander Nekrasov. We say goodbye to you, and we thank you sincerely for joining us. Now we welcome Yahya Al-Aridi. He's a spokesman for the Opposition Syrian Negotiations Commission. Yahya Al-Aridi, you've been listening to the rest of the program. Let me ask you, as a Syrian, as the Syrian on the panel, tell me what's your take on the past 15 minutes?
Well, good evening to you and to your guests. Actually, I wanted really to avoid this type of propaganda happening, accusing others of propaganda, but just doing it himself. I wanted to be with him, but on conditions that things are quite polite and normal. Actually, Russia says continuously that it is being invited by a legitimate government in Syria. Actually, a government loses its legitimacy immediately when it shoots its people, when it destroys them, when it displaces half of the country, and when it has almost 500,000 people in its jail. For Russia, it seems that the 22.9 million Syrians are either ISIS or Nusra or extremists or terrorists. The only exception to that is that the party that invited it to come to Syria. Russia came to Syria with the airplanes, with jets, destroying markets, destroying hospitals and these things. But now Russia is in a hurry, in a tense situation. It's after finding a political solution. It wants to get the fruit of the 3 months promised by Putin that he would settle the issue there. Now it is 3 months, but 3 years. What your guests are saying about this issue is that now we have a conflict between the parties who came as they say, upon the invitation of the legitimate government. Actually, we wish that the Iranians were there, the Russians were there, just to respond to people's wishes, to people's demands early on that they wanted some freedom. On the contrary to that, they just responded to what the regime wanted. It wanted to stay on that bloody chair only. And we wanted them. And now we are creating another problem, creating a problem for us with Israel. Now Israel is using Iran as a pretext to pass that resolution in the Knesset. It was the one that was passed in 1981, and it was considered by the Security Council as null and void. It wanted to have control over the Syrian-occupied Golan Heights under the pretext of the existence of Iran there. So
right.
The Syrian land is being used as
that's a good point. Let me ask. Okay, interesting point. Let me ask Mayor Javidan, do you see it as cynically as that Knesset's passing through this motion in order to entrench occupation, in order to say, hey, there's Iranian influence in Golan Heights, let's rubber stamp this and let's make this our land for good?
I think what's happening in Israel is that even people who supported the peace deal with Syria, and make no mistake, the Golan Heights is occupied territory. We didn't receive it as part of a Hanukkah present. It is occupied territory. However, there are increasing number of Israelis who look at the Golan Heights, they look at what's happening in Syria. They see a regime that's not afraid to use chemical weapons against its own people. And the concern is that if we ever return that land to the Syrian regime, then the same regime could threaten us. So I think this seems to be the legitimate argument in Israel, which seems that there's not a lot of opposition to it in this country, even by people who usually oppose Netanyahu.
Okay, so Mohammed Marandi, the Israelis need to defend their borders no matter what. The Iranians are fiddling.
Yes, I know. It's like the chemical weapons in Jerusalem, too. The Palestinians are threatening the Israelis with nuclear and chemical weapons. That's why they chose Jerusalem as their capital, and they're annexing the West Bank because probably there are chemical weapons hidden there as well. Maybe later on in Jordan, they may find chemical weapons, too, so that they can take more territory from there. Obviously, it's nonsense. Just like the fact that the Israeli regime is not helping the extremists. We know that ISIS is on the border between Israeli regime troops, which is occupying Syria since decades ago. The ISIS is on the border. They are between Syrian troops and the Israeli regime forces, but the Israeli regime does nothing against them. They've been there for years. Al-Qaeda, on the other hand, they are helped by the Israeli regime. And just recently, people have been sentenced by Druze for protesting and killing one of the Nusra or Al-Qaeda militants that were being taken by an ambulance to an Israeli regime hospital. So the Israeli regime is helping Al-Qaeda, as the former head of Mossad admitted. They tolerate ISIS and they bomb Syria.
Can I get you to wrap it? Can I get you to wrap it? Borzu, we're wrapping in a minute, so Borzu, very briefly, please, and then I'll get some final thoughts from Yahya. Borzu?
I mean, this is a very tough situation right now that is taking place in Syria. I don't really think the Russians know what they're doing. And I think that the best way to think of Russia right now is as a bumbling superpower that has entered the fray into a very complex Middle East situation and is trying to manage various parts, is not doing a very good job of it, is telling the Israelis what they want to hear, telling the Iranians what they want to hear, telling the regime of Bashar al-Assad what it wants to hear, perhaps telling the White House what it wants to hear. And that's a very dangerous recipe right now because Russia doesn't have any leverage over any of these players. So the Iranians could be like saying, sure, we'll leave the border area, meanwhile send guys in. The Syrians could be telling them, yeah, we're telling the Iranians to get out. And they're not telling the Iranians to get out. And that's a recipe for accident and miscalculation and potentially cataclysmic war.
Yahya, some people see the Russian influence as a stabilizing influence, no matter how ugly the players are, no matter how many people Bashar al-Assad has killed. They say, well, Russia's sorting it out. It's not absolute Armageddon and absolute chaos. Your response to that is what?
We wish Russia would be a stabilizing factor in Syria. Unfortunately, Russia is trying to sell the Syrian card to several parties. to the Israelis, to the Americans, to the Iranians, etc., and even to the Turks. Although Turkey is a neighbor and it's hosting Syrians, over 3 million, which is something appreciated by all Syrians. That's one thing. Another thing, if Russia wanted now to settle the issue between Iran and Israel, Iran actually, from the early days of the Khomeini, it just assigned itself as the custodian for Jerusalem, and it just denied Muslims and Arabs of that right.
No, it never did any such thing. Of course not.
It's close to the Israeli border due to the fact that Syria is devastated and nobody is fighting it. Now, being in that particular position, Iran thinks that this would give it some sort of a credit that it is the leader of resistance and steadfastness.
No, Iran is in Syria because the United States has helped to destroy the country, and Iran is there to push back the extremists. The black flags would be in Damascus. If it wasn't for the Americans, we wouldn't have had this mess in the first place.
Do you see
we wouldn't have had Iranians in Syria. And we have an American force occupying the country without the permission of any government.
Okay, I'm in the horrible position of having to stop all of you because we're completely out of time. But I thank you all for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Yahya Al-Aridi, Mohammed Marandi, Mayor Javid Anfer, Borzu Daragahi, and earlier Alexander Nekrasov. Gentlemen, there's a lot more to say because of the very nature of this conflict. Hope to have you all on the program again. Thank you very much. Asad Durrani was once the head of Pakistan's powerful spy agency, the Inter-Services Intelligence, or ISI. Now he's joined forces with his Indian counterpart and co-authored a book which is creating waves across South Asia. It's called The Spy Chronicles, Raw ISI and the Illusion of Peace. It unpacks sensitive issues relating to security and foreign policy and makes accusations against both governments. One that stands out is that the ISI was fully aware of the US operation to raid Osama bin Laden's compound, something Islamabad has always denied. Following the book's launch in India, Durrani has been placed on the no-fly list, and Pakistan's army has ordered an inquiry into his motives. If found guilty of any wrongdoing, he could face a lengthy prison sentence. So, why write the book? Let's ask the author himself, Asad Durrani, who joins me now from the Pakistani city of Rawalpindi. Sir, pleasure having you on the Newsmakers. You're on the exit control list, as they call it. You're banned from leaving the country. Did you expect that?
Look, I'm here to talk about the book and not about any problems that I may have with my old institutions. You have already started on the wrong foot because I never said that Pakistani ISI was aware of that. I said it's my assessment that we found out at some time.
Okay.
But right now, if there are any questions that you have about the book, I'll talk about it.
Okay, certainly. So you said it was your assessment, and that is one of the things that is troubling a lot of people because they feel it flew in the face of the official policy. I don't want to make this uncomfortable for you, so I guess you can tell me very clearly, might this interview itself get you in trouble, and that's why you have to be cautious about what you're saying?
If I have to talk about the book, I will have no problem. But just in case anyone was to, put words in my mouth,
certainly,
like I think you did a little earlier, then I'm afraid I'll have to probably terminate the interview.
Okay, so let me then take that accusation or the anger towards you, because there has been anger and there's been ramifications and repercussions. One of them being that you can't leave the country. This is out there as public fact, but I'm not going to ask you about that. It was your assessment that the ISI knew about the raid on Abbottabad, and that was in your book. Do you think that people are angry because of that, or they're more angry at the fact that you co-authored the book with the former head of RAW?
I have no idea. People can pick and choose their own reasons to be either angry or to be appreciative. That's up to them. But once again, when I talk about my assessment, it must remain at that. There is a reason I carried out this assessment on the 2nd of May, or maybe it was the 3rd of May 2011, when I was called by the BBC Hot Talk. And so I carried out a little bit of analysis and came to that conclusion. So far, I have no reasons to either change it or say that, no, I was right and everyone else is wrong.
Are you...
That's the...
Certainly, sir. Are you proud of what the book has managed to achieve so far? Are you proud of what's been out there?
Thank you. I think that's the question that one can very conveniently start with. That was the idea. Number one, have my narrative, the way I see things have happened, to be recorded in a book. And what better that it is a book not only co-authored with a former intelligence chief, but also gets published in India. And I never expected that it would receive such a lot of, response, applause, appreciation by the crowd there. And that is the thing that I followed on the TV. I could not be there myself. So you're right. I think I may have reasons to be, if not proud, to be gratified that my message got through.
For those who say that you were making assessments, and I'm using your words again, you were making assessments on eras and periods that were long after your time in office. You were there between 1990 and 1992. So what do you know about what was happening in 2011 or 2012?
Absolutely. I think this is the point. If I knew anything, for example, a couple of things that I may have known during my period, and if I find that they are sensitive, I would not even talk about them. But carrying out an assessment is my basic right. And I do believe that my previous experience qualifies me to say a few things that I may have concluded.
Did your book reveal any state secrets?
No, of course not. That would have been very, foolish on my part if I were to reveal any secrets, nor has my counterpart done. Now, that is something, without even agreeing on this thing, this was understandable. We were not there to exchange secrets or to spill beans. We were there to actually give our account of how we saw things happen, and then learn from the other side any shortfalls that in our assessments, in our understanding. Now, that was the aim.
Pervez Musharraf called it foolishness, co-authoring a book with the former head of RAW. What's your response to that?
No, I'd never comment on what people have to say. I have said why I did it. I'm sure there are people who will call it either a foolish act or they'll call it a very brave act, an unprecedented one, and a fantastic idea, first time probably ever done anywhere. So it's up to the people. I'm not going to either comment on that. And I haven't in any case heard the context in which he might have said that.
Tell me the story behind how this came about. Tell me the genesis of it. How did the two of you decide to write a book together?
Yeah, again, I think this is a very legitimate question. We have been on the track too for many years, maybe over 10 years. We have written joint papers together on intelligence cooperation, on Kashmir. And over a period of time, one thought that if we have gone to the extent and we can speak frankly, then a product like that may be useful, if not for the present generations, which may still be, suffering from a certain paranoia, for the coming generations.
If they decide to take further action against you, sir, would it have been worth it?
As I said, that is not the point that I'm going to even comment upon. And I never do that. This is between me and the institution. I have no idea how it's going to turn out.
Are you confident that you won't be in trouble?
So once again, I think this is the same line of questioning that I have tried in my own way to discourage you from following.
Okay. For people who want to read the book, who are intrigued, what's the most important reason for them to read the book?
They just have to read it, come to their own conclusions. These are the views of two people who in their own time had known a few things, must have missed out on a couple of things, must have made mistakes, must have misunderstood certain signals, But now in now in the hindsight, they are putting a few things together. So if they want to learn or pick up a few pearls of wisdom here, they are welcome. After reading, they can also throw it in the trash if they like.
Sir, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I thank you for taking the time to talk to us on the Newsmakers. Asad Durrani, thank you. And that's all for this edition of The Newsmakers with me, Imran Garta. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Next time, Jordan's Prime Minister resigns after mass protests. Will that be enough to meet demonstrators' demands? Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.